It was Christmas Eve, and the snow was falling slowly, painting the streets white. My phone vibrated in my hand with a message I never imagined I'd receive. "Your place at the table will not be needed this year." I read those words over and over, hoping it was some kind of mistake, but it wasn't. The message came from my parents, short and cold, with no explanation. A tightness gripped my chest. Christmas has always been sacred to us. As a child, I was the first to help set the table, carefully placing each plate and decorating the centerpiece with candles and evergreen branches. Now, I was being pushed aside for no reason. Or maybe the reason was something they didn't want to say out loud. Share this story to reach further, subscribe to the channel, share this video on WhatsApp, and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. I'll be very happy to read each comment. My first impulse was to accept it, to stay home, to avoid confrontation. But something inside me burned. I needed to understand. I needed to see for myself what was happening. It wasn't just about an empty chair. It was about something that had changed between us that I couldn't name. As I put on my coat, I felt a strange mix of fear and determination. I didn't know if I would encounter a misunderstanding or something much worse. But at that moment, silence wasn't an option. I was going to show up, invitation or no invitation. And so, I grabbed my keys and left, feeling the cold wind bite my face. The drive to my parents' house had never seemed so long. The snow crunched under my feet as I parked in front of the house where I grew up. The windows were lit, and from inside came the distant sound of laughter and Christmas music. Outside, it was as always, welcoming, with the wreath on the door and the scent of pine drifting through the cracks. But I knew something was wrong. I took a deep breath and climbed the porch steps, feeling the warmth of the lights contrast with the biting chill of the night. For a moment, I hesitated. What I was about to do could change my relationship with them forever, but backing out was no longer possible. I looked through the glass in the door and saw everyone gathered at the table. Plates were served, glasses raised, and everyone was smiling. And in my seat, someone I didn't know. A younger woman, laughing and chatting as if she were part of the family. My stomach churned. I knocked on the door, and for a few seconds no one moved. Then my father appeared, surprised and visibly uncomfortable. He opened it just a crack, as if to block my entry. His eyes spoke louder than any words, and nothing I saw there reassured me. It was at that moment that I realized that that night would be much more than just a Christmas dinner. My father kept the door just ajar, as if that gesture could stem the tension already permeating the air. His expression was a mix of embarrassment and something I couldn't quite decipher. Maybe guilt, maybe pent-up anger. The Christmas music played softly behind him, mingling with the familiar scent of roast turkey and cinnamon, but none of it warmed the atmosphere between us. Every second of silence was a sharp blow to the chest. I felt the chill of the street seep into my bones, but the true ice was in his gaze. "We weren't expecting you," I said, without raising my voice much. It sounded more like a warning than an acknowledgement. My eyes involuntarily drifted inside, where the woman was in my seat, chatting animatedly with my mother. No one seemed to notice me, or worse, they were pretending not to. My fingers clenched in my coat pocket, trying to hold back the avalanche of words threatening to spill out. The narrow hallway behind him seemed more distant than ever. This was the same space I passed through every year, carrying serving dishes, helping to set up extra chairs so no one was left out. Now, it was as if I were an inconvenient visitor, someone who needed to be kept out. The warm light of the room seemed to mock me, accentuating the shadow where I stood. "I just want to come in and say Merry Christmas," I managed, trying to keep my voice steady. My father took a deep breath, and in that brief moment, I could see the internal struggle in his eyes. He knew there was no way to stop it forever, but something made him want to postpone the inevitable. Behind him, my mother finally looked up at me, and what I saw on her face brought a lump to my throat. It was fear, real fear, and it instantly changed my mind. I wasn't there just to wish people happy holidays. I needed to know what was going on. When he finally gave way, I stepped inside, feeling the warmth of the house wrap around me like a heavy blanket. But the coziness was false. There was something suffocating in the air, an almost palpable tension hidden behind the forced smiles. The table was impeccably set with china and red cloth napkins. In the center was an arrangement of flowers and candles that I had helped choose years ago, but which now felt like a carefully arranged setting for someone else. The woman in my seat looked at me with a polite but cold smile. Her eyes scanned my clothes. my face, as if assessing whether something was out of place. I introduced myself, and she responded with a simple, "I know who you are," before returning to her conversation with my brother as if I weren't there. It was a simple phrase, but laden with a condescension that hurt more than any direct insult. My father tried to start a banal conversation about the weather, but his voice sounded distant, as if he were reciting lines he didn't believe. My mother remained silent, pouring wine for everyone, avoiding my gaze. Only once did our eyes meet, and she shook her head slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if asking me not to say anything. I sat in a spare chair at the corner of the table, where everyone's view was partially obscured by the central arrangement. It was as if I were a spectator at a strange play, where all the actors pretended not to notice the presence of an intruder. But I wasn't the intruder. I knew it deep down. Something was wrong, and the woman in my seat was living proof. While everyone laughed at a joke I didn't understand, I began to observe. Gestures, glances, pauses. It was subtle, but there was an unspoken code passing between them, and I was there to decipher it, no matter the cost. Dinner continued, but to me, every movement seemed to happen in slow motion. I watched my parents exchange quick glances with the woman in my seat, as if they were constantly confirming something with each other. My siblings talked, but there was an exaggerated caution in their words, as if trying to avoid mentioning a forbidden subject. With each sip of wine, the atmosphere felt heavier, as if the house itself were carrying a secret it didn't want to reveal. I began to notice small details. The woman wore a necklace I knew well, a pendant that belonged to my grandmother, cherished by my mother, and which, as far as I knew, had never been lent to anyone. She also had a napkin embroidered with my name next to her plate, something that had always marked my place at the table since I was a child. It was as if she wasn't just taking my place, but taking over my story. When I tried to strike up a conversation, I noticed that the responses were always quick and clipped, as if there was no interest in continuing the conversation. My parents avoided any mention of the past, of our previous Christmases, as if they were erasing an entire line of our history. This wasn't just discomfort, it was deliberate, and I felt like every smile they gave me was a poorly crafted disguise. My appetite vanished. I toyed with the food on my plate, but my focus was on the faces, the averted gazes. When I asked who exactly that woman was, my father simply replied, "A family friend." But there was an almost imperceptible tremor in his voice. It was the first crack in the wall they were trying to maintain between us. And it was at that moment, observing the tension hidden in their gestures and the complicit silence that hung over the table, that I realized, whatever the truth was, it wasn't something my parents were willing to tell me. At least, not without being forced. My patience began to melt like ice melting in water. I felt like if I didn't confront them soon, I would suffocate in this rehearsed theater. I rested my elbows on the table and looked directly at my father, ignoring the obvious discomfort it caused. "Why did you say I wasn't needed here this year?" The question fell like a lead weight in the center of the table, and the silence that followed was louder than any music. The woman in my seat slowly put down her fork, setting it down on her plate with a metallic clang. Her eyes locked with mine, and for a second there was something like a silent challenge between us. My brothers lowered their gazes, and my mother remained still, just breathing deeply, as if preparing for something. It was my father who broke the silence, but his answer was laced with hesitation. "We thought, perhaps, it would be better this way." That loose, incomplete sentence was the trigger. My voice rose, and I asked directly if the woman was in my place for a specific reason. No one answered. The only sound was the crackling of the candles burning in the center of the table. It was like being surrounded by living statues, each choosing silence as their weapon. The tension spread like smoke, slow and suffocating. I felt the heat rise in my face, not just from anger, but from fear of what that unspoken answer might mean. Christmas, for me, had always been about togetherness, but here, for the first time, it felt more like a battlefield disguised as a celebration. And then, before anyone could try to change the subject, a strange noise echoed from the kitchen. A muffled metallic sound, as if something had fallen to the floor, or someone had accidentally dropped something. It was enough to make everyone exchange a quick glance, and for me to decide I needed to see what was going on inside. I got up without asking permission, ignoring the dissuasive looks. The sound from the kitchen still echoed in my mind, metallic and strange. As I walked down the hallway, I caught a strong smell of something burning, mixed with the sweet aroma of roast turkey. The light was on, but the room felt colder than it should have. It was as if the heat from the rest of the house hadn't reached there. In the corner, on the counter, I saw a fallen pan, the spilled liquid forming a dark puddle on the floor. It didn't look like sauce or wine. The color was different, deeper, almost like rust dissolved in water. I bent down to get a better look, but before I could touch it, I felt a presence behind me. My hair stood on end even before I heard the sound. I turned slowly and saw my mother standing in the doorway, her face tense, and her eyes silently pleading with me not to ask anything. She took a step forward, blocking my view of a half-open cabinet in the back. It was as automatic as it was calculated, and it only heightened my suspicion. Something was hiding there. "Come back to the table," she said, her tone not a request, but an order. It was firm, but fraught with something else. Fear. Fear that I would see, that I would find out, and that fear gave me courage. I took a deep breath and approached the cabinet, trying to avoid her, but before I could open it, my father appeared, calling my mother to take care of something in the backyard. They left together, leaving the kitchen in silence. I knew this was my chance. With trembling hands, I slowly opened the closet door. The scent that escaped was intense and bittersweet, a mixture of old flowers and dampness. Inside, boxes were stacked, but one in particular, in the center, seemed recently placed there. The wood was new, contrasting with the rest. I knelt and pulled it closer, feeling its considerable weight. Upon opening, I found something I hadn't expected at Christmas. Photos. Lots of photos, but none of them of family celebrations. They were old, faded images, showing people I didn't know, sitting at that same table in the living room, but with empty, almost somber expressions. In some, there were children who resembled members of our family, but younger, and always next to someone who wasn't in the other photos. At the bottom of the box, a specific photo made me shudder. It was the Christmas table from a few years ago, and I was there. But beside me, in the spot where that woman sat today, was the same figure that appeared in all the old photos. Her, with the same smile, exactly the same, without a sign of aging. That was impossible. My heart raced. I began to gather the photos quickly, wanting to take them with me as proof, but a sound in the hallway made me freeze. Footsteps, slow, approaching, each one heavier than the last. I knew they weren't my parents. I hurriedly closed the box and stepped back, but when I looked up, she was in the kitchen doorway, staring at me. The same smile from the photo, now before me, alive and real. She stood in the doorway for what seemed like an eternity. Her smile remained unwavering, fixed, as if painted on her face. Her eyes didn't blink, and there was something deeply wrong with them. They didn't reflect the kitchen light, like dark, empty wells. My hands began to sweat, and I instinctively gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. "Did you find anything interesting?" she asked, her voice too calm, drawling, each word carrying a weight that made the air seem thicker. I tried to answer, but my throat closed up. I just shook my head, trying to hide my panic. She took a step forward, and even without making a sound, it felt like the ground vibrated beneath her feet. The sweet scent in the air intensified, almost sickening, as she approached. Her eyes dropped to my hands, as if she knew exactly what I had touched. "Some things shouldn't be seen before their time," she said, still with the same calm tone, but with something menacing hidden beneath. My stomach churned. Suddenly, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I whipped around and saw my mother, panting, her eyes wide. "Come with me," she ordered in a terrified whisper, not looking directly at the woman. Before I could react, my mother grabbed my arm and led me out of the kitchen. As we walked down the hallway, I glanced back. The woman was still standing in the same spot, smiling. But now, something was different. Her lips were moving slowly, forming words I couldn't hear, but which chilled me to the bone. My mother led me to the side hallway, where the music and voices from the living room seemed distant. Her hands trembled as they held mine, and she spoke quickly, barely breathing. "You need to leave, now, before it's too late." The words were so urgent they cut off any attempt to ask what was happening. I tried to insist, asking for explanations, but she just shook her head. Her eyes were watery, and there was a deep weariness there, as if she'd been carrying this weight for years. "She's not who you think. No one is." That sentence echoed inside me, leaving me even more confused. I wanted answers, but all I received were enigmatic fragments. Before I could continue the pressure, A low, rhythmic sound began to spread through the house. 3 loud, repeated knocks, like a call. My mother closed her eyes, as if she knew exactly what it meant. "It's too late," she whispered. My heart raced. The hallway light flickered once, then again, until it went out completely. The only sound was the pounding, which now seemed to be coming from all directions. I felt a chill run down my spine, and I realized my mother was pushing me toward the back door. "Run," he said, with a firmness that clashed with the fear on his face. And before I could react, I felt that presence behind me again, heavy, almost suffocating. Driven by the desperation on my mother's face, I began to run down the narrow hallway that led to the back door. Each step made the floorboards creak, as if shouting my location to whatever was following us. The air was cold, almost biting, and I felt my breath echo in the heavy silence. The pounding continued, closer, more intense, resonating through my chest, as if my own heart were trying to escape. I reached the door and grabbed the handle, but it was locked from the inside with a latch we never used. I tried to turn it hard, but the metal felt stuck, cold as ice. My fingers slipped, and every lost second felt like an eternity. Behind me, I could hear a different sound now. Slow, shuffling footsteps, accompanied by heavy, almost animal breathing. I twisted again, using all my weight, and finally the latch gave way with a sharp click. But before I could open it fully, a shadow loomed against the wall in front of me, stretching until it touched my feet. The shape was tall, misshapen, and seemed to move even without enough light to create that outline. My stomach churned. The door opened with a blast of cold wind, and the snow swirled in, as if trying to pull me out. I glanced quickly at my mother, who remained a few steps behind, paralyzed. Her eyes said it all. She couldn't follow me, not because she didn't want to, but because something was holding her there, and that tore me apart inside. I took a step outside, but the sound of breathing behind me grew louder, as if the distance between us had disappeared. I knew I couldn't stop. Not now. The cold air hit my face like a blade, instantly making my eyes water. The yard, lit only by the yellowish light escaping from the house, seemed larger than I remembered. The trees were covered in snow, their twisted branches casting shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. Each footstep sank into the soft snow, leaving a trail that could be easily followed. Behind me, the door slammed shut, as if slammed shut by invisible hands. I glanced reflexively and saw something through the fogged glass. It wasn't my mother. It was her, the woman from my seat. The smile was still there, but now there was something animalistic in her gaze, something that made me quicken my pace without thinking. I ran toward the side gate, the quickest way to the street. The icy wind bit my ears, and I heard a ragged sound accompanying me. Footsteps, but not in the snow. They were lighter, faster, as if they were moving just beneath the surface. The thought that something might be approaching from beneath me made my skin crawl. I reached the gate and tried to open it, but it was secured by a padlock that shouldn't have been there. I began to pull hard, ignoring the pain shooting up my arms. Around me, the silence was broken by a whisper, low and repetitive, coming from all sides. "Stay, stay." The voice sounded exactly like the woman's, but also like my mother's, blended into a distorted chorus. It was at that moment that I realized I wasn't just trying to escape a house. I was trying to escape something much bigger, something that already surrounded me on all sides. The whisper continued, spreading across the yard like an invisible mist that invaded my ears and stirred my thoughts. I looked around, trying to pinpoint its origin, but there was no clear source. The trees seemed closer, their branches leaning in as if to grab me. The feeling of being watched from every angle was overwhelming, almost physical. Suddenly, I saw movement at the side of the house. It wasn't the woman. It was human shadows, several of them, walking slowly, surrounding the yard. Their faces were blurs, without defined features, but they all had the same rhythmic gait, as if responding to a single command. The snow made no sound under their feet, and this made everything even more unsettling. I started to back away, but realized the gate was no longer my only blocked exit. The figures spread out strategically, blocking any path. Some stopped and simply watched me, motionless, like statues. Others took slow steps, approaching. With every second, the circle closed in. My heart was beating so fast I could barely breathe. I felt a heat rise up my neck, a mixture of adrenaline and dread. And then, in the middle of them, I saw the woman. She wasn't walking. She simply stood there, a a few feet away, as if she'd materialized. Her smile was still fixed, but now her eyes shone with an almost metallic glow. "You never had a choice," she said, her voice sounding like it was coming from inside my head. In that moment, I realized that escape wouldn't be simple. The shadows stopped at her voice, as if awaiting orders. The woman took a step forward, and with that movement, the air seemed to change density, becoming heavier. It was difficult even to breathe. My entire body was tense, every muscle ready to react. But my mind struggled to decide whether to run or fight. She held out her hand, palm up, as if inviting me to come closer. But there was something in the gesture that wasn't human. It was hypnotic, almost like a silent command. I felt my legs take an involuntary step, and it took all my strength to stop. In the background, I heard my mother shout my name, but her voice seemed to come from far away. "It's time to remember," the woman said, and as she heard that, flashes began to flash through my mind. Images of other Christmases, other years, but with details that didn't match. People I didn't recognize, sitting at the table. Me, younger, beside her, always the same, always smiling. She didn't age, she didn't change. I began to feel dizzy, as if the ground beneath my feet were giving way. The shadows around me began to draw closer again, moving in sync with my rapid breathing. The cold of the snow no longer mattered. There was a deeper chill, coming from within. The next thing I knew, she was inches away, her eyes locked on mine, and in that instant, I knew revelation was near. But the burning question in my mind was, did I really want to know? The world around me seemed to blur as her eyes locked with mine. A strange heat crept up the back of my neck, and the snow, the shadows, even the sound of the wind, everything disappeared. In its place came a memory that didn't feel like just a memory. It felt like living it all over again. I saw myself, a child, sitting at the Christmas table. Beside me, the same woman, exactly the same, watching me as if she were both guardian and jailer. The images moved forward like pages turning quickly. Different years, different tables, but always the same pattern. She was present, occupying changing places, but always close to me. And then I realized, each time a place at the table was taken from someone, that person disappeared from subsequent celebrations, never mentioned again, never seen again. I had watched it happen, but my mind seemed to have been trained to forget. The woman tilted her head, watching my reaction. "Now you understand," she whispered, and it was as if her voice were stitching together every loose thread of my memory. A shiver ran down my spine, and I realized my exclusion that year had not been a coincidence. I was next. My place was being taken, just like everyone else's before me. The shadows closed in again, and I knew I had seconds to act. I took a step back, trying to break the trance, but the invisible weight on my shoulders pushed me forward. My mother appeared at the edge of the circle, tears in her eyes, holding something small and shiny, a key. "Run!" she shouted, throwing the object toward me. I snatched the key from the air and, on impulse, ran toward the gate, ignoring the chorus of voices shouting behind me. I unlocked the lock and walked through, feeling the cool, open air of the street. But as I ran, I turned back and saw the woman standing at the gate, smiling. And this time, she didn't say anything, but her lips moved, as if promising me she'd return. If you've made it this far, share this story so more people know what happened. Subscribe to the channel, send it to your friends on WhatsApp, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read them all with great affection, and I want to know if you've also experienced something you've never been able to explain.